Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast. On this episode, I'll be speaking to Faisal. He has recently received a diagnosis of ADHD and dyspraxia, and we go into detail about his life leading up to his diagnosis, his childhood, his school life, and his other relationships. And it's a really wonderful conversation. I really hope you enjoy it and you share our video and like it on our social media platforms. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, Faisal. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Mindful Muslim podcast. It's great to have you.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me, Sivan.
Lovely to meet you again. And yeah, I guess I will just go straight into our conversation and firstly ask you about your recent diagnosis that you had in terms of ADHD, what that was like for you, and also if you could give us a little bit of a breakdown, some general information about ADHD would be amazing, I'm sure, for a lot of our listeners and viewers as well.
So basically, ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's a part of the neurodiversity or neurodivergent family tree. So that involves autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and also Tourette's as well. And there's quite a few others as well. So what this actually is, it's if you look into it, it's basically people with ADHD, our brain size is actually different compared to basically you could say 95% of humanity, and it's basically a pattern of behavior which is present in multiple settings. So that's like, for example, at home or at school, or like, for example, at work. So it's present, it's like consistent, but it sort of like manifests itself differently, and when it's sort of undiagnosed especially, it can result in like a lack of performance in them areas, and so basically if you were to kind of look into it in a typical narrative, so especially in children, it's a often a state of activity or excitement, so it's a abundance of attention. People think it's a lack of attention, but so let's say our brains are whizzing in so many directions at the same time, and it's basically hard to control it. So there's essentially three types of it. So there's predominantly inattentive, and then there's hyperactive as well, and then this combination of both of them is basically what I've got. So there's not essentially one cause of ADHD. It's considered to sort of be a result of the complex factors such as your genes and also the environment around you as well. And also it carries on from childhood into adulthood. So within the diagnosis, they judge you. The psychiatrist judges you against what's it called, against these criteria, and they have to be from there with you from childhood to adulthood. So essentially, like if you look into it in the UK, so there was a study done where there was 10,000 children um, between the age of 5 and 15 years, where they found a, a percentage of like 4% of boys and basically 1% of girls who had ADHD in the UK. So essentially, it's like the psychiatrist will judge you whether you're a hyperactive person. That's a person who's whizzing around all the time. So you might see a noisy child or a child that's completely not listening to you, and they're always whizzing and they can't sit down and stay still. Or inattentive is basically like you could say where they're in fairyland or daydreaming, or like sort of just totally unaware of everything going on around them. And then the combination of them is basically you could have both of them. So I'm either hyperactive at one point or I'm sort of like in fairyland the next, and that really sort of depends on how I am within my environment and circumstances. Um, and also basically, when they've done this sort of examination on people's brains with ADHD, they done a study in 2017 of 72 young adults, and within the brain of people with ADHD, they have more grey matter in their brain, and so like the widespread areas of the brains of the people were also smaller in shape. So that included the frontal lobe, and which is involved in the actions such as impulse control and concentration. And people with ADHD also have low levels of dopamine transporters, and depression and anxiety, suicidality, divorce issues. These are all sort of kind of consequences, or like can be very impacted, especially if you do have ADHD. So that's a nutshell of that.
Yeah, so thank you so much for giving that overview and going into detail about the study you mentioned as well. There's clearly a lot going on, and as you mentioned, there's lots of different presentations of ADHD, and how people experience them can be different, lots of different symptoms. Um, but what was it like for you? So you mentioned that sometimes children are can be diagnosed with ADHD, but your sort of diagnosis was quite recent. So what age was that, and what was it like to actually get that diagnosis?
So I was 26 years old, and basically I moved to London at the beginning of lockdown in 2020 for work purposes and stuff, and literally I didn't know the world was going to change within a week. So that impacted my sort of, obviously, working from home like never before. No routine, no structure like we had in university or in school days. Like there was always a consistent timetable, or you catching the train or catching a ride to drive into work. So it started to. I was 26 years old, and so it started to, when I was living out there in London. It started to sort of impact me in a way where I basically felt my life was just continuing, like it's just kept on hitting the ceiling. So like 2 years ago, well, in 2019, I was sort of diagnosed with anxiety and depression as well, so that's a big factor of this as well. So since then my life just kept on hitting the ceiling. I went to sort of the counsel I went to counseling and stuff like that, and I couldn't figure out why. But then working from home, I worked in a busy press office, so and it was for a public sector organization, and imagine my work directly had to go to journalists, and very very important information such as deaths or accidents of road traffic collisions and stuff like that. I had to be basically on top of it. And so imagine my entire life, I've been through school, I've been through uni, I've been through the traditional, I've started my career for a few years, and I kept on hitting the ceiling. And then about a year later into my career, well, my workplace, my line manager goes to me, so you're good with certain things, but there's certain things you're making mistakes on. And that was my grammar, that was my processing of information from like WhatsApp groups on the phone, to trying to incorporate that into sort of emails and stuff like that. And I wasn't able to absorb the information, and I ended up starting to proofread my own work about 9, 10 times, and I was still making grammatical mistakes. Um, and I couldn't, I don't know why. Like I just, honestly, it just kept hitting the ceiling for me. And my sentence structure, my organization of information, it was all over the place, and I couldn't pinpoint why. Because, like I said, I went through school, I went through uni and everything, and I've even worked with so many different companies. So why didn't it pick up then? So that's where it kind of, well, I started to click on. It was a bit weird, and then I remembered um, uh, somebody that I knew. They said to me back then that like they feel that I might be dyslexic because I read something weird, and I said it weirdly to them, and they said to me, "Are you dyslexic?" And I was like, "No, like that's weird. Nobody's ever said that to me in my life." But then I remembered like a few years ago where a few years ago somebody said I had ADHD sort of tendencies. I was thinking, what does that mean? Like, honestly, I never put my attention towards that. That's a pun. Um, so like, I remembered. Basically, I'm also an artist as well. So this is where this picture sort of fits in. So I've for the last it's been like this year, alhamdulillah, it's been 10 years of me actually being an artist as well. So from a young age, I was always whizzing. I was always participating in activities and even like my art projects. Like for over the last few years, I've bouncing around so many projects. Like honestly, never before. At one point, I even got to the point where I was working 120 hours a week, and that was juggling like three, four jobs, my creative stuff on the side, and I couldn't stop. So that's the interesting part now. So like obviously everything was hitting a ceiling. My life was going downhill. I fell out of the things I loved, so fell out of love with the things that I used to do. So with art as well, that's been on a pause for the last sort of few years. I've not been putting my full attention within that. My relationships were all over the place. Like it made me start to understand, like basically. So from the Thursday, like there was a Thursday to the Monday, yeah. So from the Thursday, it was the situation where my old friend said like, "Oh, you might have a dyslexia and stuff." And then I looked into ADHD because I remember somebody said that to me a few years ago. And then like 4 days, I was just researching it non-stop. What is this? I started doing online assessments for like dyspraxia and all of them as well. And basically, it started to tick all the boxes. I was like, yo, this is actually crazy. And so I literally, so against all the symptoms and stuff like that, I literally got a notepad and I started to literally write down all my all my sort of life experiences with with the symptoms. So how did I sort of like emotionally respond and stuff like that in line with the symptoms? And I've done that for all sort of like dyslexia and stuff like that as well. So I brought it up with the workplace as well because in the end of the day, I'm feeling really rubbish about myself because like I'm making all these mistakes and stuff, but why can't I improve? Like I keep on hitting this ceiling, and then that's where I contacted learning support, and that's where it got picked up. And then I went to my doctors because I told my doctor a few years ago about the sort of depression and anxiety stuff, and I said, look, I have like a really big feeling that I have these conditions as well. So that's where I went to my doctors, and then I told them, look, I might have ADHD and these other factors, but I then went through my doctor, and there's other organization. It's called Access to Work. No, not Access to Work. It's called Psychiatry UK. Sorry, and with Psychiatry UK, with ADHD, you can get referred from your GP to them. So with the NHS, the waiting list was 3 years, and to be honest, like 26 years, I could not afford to like. My life was just hitting the ceiling too hard. Like it was basically crumbling, basically. I and so I went through that, and then it took me about nine from February. So chasing them, yeah, it took me about 9, 10 months on the waiting list, and that's where I sort of got diagnosed in November. And then
So, just to interrupt you there to get a little bit more information about is this the organization you mentioned is obviously separate to the NHS, and so it
yeah,
meant that your diagnosis was sooner?
yeah, so it was sooner than actually waiting on my local county service because the local services they done my assessment, but they said to me it could take up to 3 years on the waiting list, NHS waiting list. I really couldn't, to be honest.
Mm. And so, the organization you contacted was Psychiatry UK, did you?
Yep, yep, because they have a right to choose initiative. So that right to choose is basically like you can choose whether you want to wait on the NHS or you could choose to go with them or privately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so through them, was it again assessments and seeing a psychiatrist and officially getting a diagnosis?
Yeah. So that was done through the psychiatrist, and then with my workplace, they done the other assessments for like dyslexia, dyspraxia, and stuff because I already had it confirmed for ADHD from my personal psychiatrist.
Sure, sure. And I know that in November 2021 it was ADHD that you were diagnosed with, but also in conjunction with that, it was dyspraxia too. So can you give us a little bit more information of how that presents for you, dyspraxia?
So ADHD and dyspraxia, they're literally like that. So with dyspraxia, that impacts my sensory. No, sorry, my information processing as well. So, like that includes a lot of clumsiness, my left and right coordination, taking directions whilst I'm driving in the car, and let's say if there's like a radio on or something like that, and somebody's trying to give me instructions, it can get very overwhelming. And so that's that side, but ADHD also impacts that as well. Um, so it's very very intense, like how they sort of work together. But that's the thing with ADHD, you can have other comorbidities such as dyslexia and dyspraxia, autism as well. So they all it's such a big family, like it kind of works together in a way. Um, but
Mm. And you also mentioned when you were a child or a teenager, there were certain symptoms or tendencies that you had that sort of or some behavioral patterns that might have indicated ADHD. But as you say, it was never something that was picked up either, family, parents, or in school. Importantly, a lot of schools are actually, I think, becoming a lot more aware about. Um, certain conditions or just noticing neurodiversity in their students. Um, so, what was it like for you looking back on your life as a child?
So to be honest, like I was a very hyper child who loved doing different things, and I had fascinations like watching documentaries. Loved transport like ships, planes. Wanted to be a pilot as well, like at 2 years old. I also love nature, building things, Lego. I even had like a model Titanic at one point, putting that together at a very young age. However, so I was also very emotional. I was either this is with ADHD, so we have emotional processing is very very difficult. So I was either very very happy or very very sad, and nothing between. So like if you looked at my birthday videos or family birthday videos from when you were young as children, I was very impatient, or was either angry or extremely happy. Like there was nothing between that. And then obviously post diagnosis, I learned this is because of my emotional dysregulation. Um, and I couldn't detect it as I just thought it was just being me, like an emotional kid or being highly functional. And but then I did struggle in school, but then again I thought that was me. And so let's say in English you have reading, writing tests, and then you have your creative stuff, and then there's comprehension stuff. And consecutively amongst all the exams, whether it's maths or English or science, whatever it was the comprehension which I struggled with, and I didn't know that I was struggling with that until obviously last year. So no, I wasn't given that any 25% extra time or like doing. I wasn't given any of that because the teachers wouldn't pick it up because I was a teacher's pet or so nerdy. I didn't fit the typical hyperactive, naughty ADHD boy. So they couldn't pick that up. And then there was the constant restlessness as well. So that affects how, when I was sitting down, all this trying to sort of bounce my legs, squirm around. I couldn't sit down on the floor. So even on the sofa at home, I've always been bouncing my leg, getting like just told off by family, like stop it, but I can't control it. So it's like the fidgeting and all this feeling on edge. I was already very actively engaged to like stimulus. And then I also struggled with like friendships and groups as well. I was clumsy and forgetful, but again, I just thought it was me. Another big factor, so this is the Islamic, how it affects my Islamic upbringing as well. So in mosque, obviously, with ADHD, it basically impacts your reading. So when I'm reading, like let's say 5 pages on the Quran, or even if it's a book, like five was it lines, I would forget what I've actually read like a millisecond after reading it. That's what ADHD is. Like my brain's moving so fast that it's got like they say it's like a Ferrari but with the brakes of a Micra. Like that's how our brains are. So like also it impacted my prayers as well. So like imagine growing up forgetting things all the time and you're thinking it's the shaitan or it's the waswasa or whatever it is, yeah, like making you forget, but it's actually my ADHD brain. So all that time I was doing all them extra sajdas after praying and stuff, but it was actually my ADHD as well. And that was obviously impacting my sort of inner confidence level, like am I Muslim enough or whatever it is. Like all this feeling down about myself. And then obviously back then it shouldn't have been this way, but obviously getting hit by the mosque teachers with little sticks and stuff. And but it wasn't my fault. I couldn't read the Quran. So how is it? How does it feel as a Muslim, as a young child growing up, because of there's a difference in your brain size and the way your brain functions. You're getting told off essentially for that, and then it being the punishments were, but we even had to write lines as well, like in mosque as well, like I must not, whatever, blah blah blah. And imagine writing, like there was a point where I even had to write 3,000 on them. And with ADHD, when your brain goes off, like it switches off on any boring task, it becomes tremendously. I couldn't even keep up with my lines compared to my other students in the class because of my brain. So it is very excruciating. And then, for example, I was also leaving my lunch at home or my lunch card or keys or forgetting homework. And one of the things with ADHD is also procrastination as well. So I used to despise doing my homework until the very last moment, and I would always figure out things beforehand to sort of figure that out. Well, to make up that time, unless I was hyper interested in the subject, because this is where one of the good things about ADHD kicks in. So when I'm hyper interested in something, I could literally forget to eat and work 8 hours straight. Like, forget that there's a world around me. So that's the interesting part. But I mean, like for example, even simple things such as like putting things back in the same place in the house or in an organizational order. That's that for a person with ADHD, like compared to our neurotypical families and stuff, like they're just thinking, why can't you do things in a simple way? Why can't you just simply do that? And I wouldn't know why, but then you're always feeling bad about it, then constantly getting nagged and stuff, and then growing into an adult as well, from being a child to an adult, and you could do so many good things, but the simplest of things you can't do. You can't put your shoes back in the rack, or you can't do your laundry properly. You can't put the dishes back in the dish rack in a certain order, and you're getting nagged at by family members and things like that, and constantly getting ridiculed for it. How does that make you feel when you're supposed to be a mature person, and because of your brain size? And then from that, it led to self-esteem issues, more confidence issues. Even one point, I was like led to friendship and relationship issues. So even getting kicked out of school as well. Like friendship groups, impulsive eating, so gaining weight because our dopamine processes are very very short. So that means we're always seeking dopamine and thrills all the time. So with junk food as well, like I was eating that, I was very very overweight as well. So that led to even further confidence issues. Um, so yeah, it was very like yeah, a bit, yeah, massive roller coaster.
Really, really difficult. I think unless you've been through those so many challenges that you've spoken about there, you can't really appreciate the difficulties that you've gone through. And I'm sure other people that are out there listening or seeing us now um, may, think about themselves and certain presentations that they have or certain challenges that they have. So I really, really appreciate that you're being so candid and honest about your experience right now. Um, so we've spoken about your childhood and school life and what led on to knock-on effects in terms of your mental health and difficulties with relationships with the people around you, even family and friends. But I wonder then, moving back to your diagnosis that you had recently, what did that actually mean for you personally? How did that change the way you felt about yourself?
I think that the diagnosis in itself, it kind of just like it ticks the box. It ticks the ticked ticked the box for me. Like it kind of showed me that I could point to something now. Like it's because of that. I'm not actually loopy in the head. I'm not crazy. Like my whole life, I've actually thought I've been crazy in the head because of the way relationships or family, the way society, the workplace, this whole system has responded to me, and I've internalized it all, thinking I'm the crazy one. But it's the way everything's reacted to me, so it led to like something I've lifted off my shoulders now, and so from that point, like I could pinpoint it. But then it sort of like also showed me like how much of a stigma it is, like to even be diagnosed with such thing, because like mental health is one area, and then you have learning difficulties as another. So even though they're two separate areas, they're so interlinked as well at the same time. But now that I could pinpoint to it as well, because like it motivated me like that to find out more about myself, because the more I learn about myself, imagine like for 26 years this has been a big percentage of my life that I've not known. So I need to sort of figure out like actually how and why do I think this way, or why do I do things in a certain way, and how could I make life easier for myself.
Mm, mm. So that leads nicely actually into my next question about how the diagnosis has changed your life. So sticking with you and obviously your personal experience you're describing here, it may not apply to everybody. And as you mentioned, the different presentations are very much varied in terms of what people experience. You know, they might experience everything you've said or some of what you've said or additional symptoms that you haven't mentioned as well. But when you did have that diagnosis and since then, so this is still fairly recent, you know, but since then, apart from that feeling of feeling like I know what's going on now, and feeling more settled in that, and you understanding yourself better, what other things do you think have have sort of changed since then?
So like I've to be honest, I've had like 2 rounds of like I had counselling like a few years ago, but then I've had counselling now, and I've also had coaching as well, like a bit of ADHD coaching and neurodiversity coaching and stuff like that. And sorry, I forgot the question.
No problem.
That's also a part of
No,
ADHD as
no,
well.
no, don't be silly. So
That's
all
crazy.
about my question was very long-winded. When you were diagnosed, since then, certain things or that you would have done in your life may have may have changed. So apart from you feeling like a weight has been lifted, what other things have you done to sort of um, anything else in your life that's changed because of the diagnosis?
Oh, so the way I've started to think as well, and like because with one of the things is with ADHD and stuff is we get a lot of intrusive thoughts, and so there's a lot of like let's say so from the moment we wake up in the morning until our eyes finally close at night, it's like a radio switched on in our brain, and unless I don't have any background noise going on, like that's where my brain starts talking in a million different areas, and it doesn't stop. So I started to realize, so over the years, basically, because when you're undiagnosed with some of these conditions, you start to figure things out as well. So I kind of tend to look at it holistically. So on a personal day-to-day basis, like literally I'm sitting in the room now, and even with my workplace and stuff like that, over the last sort of 2 3 years I've always had headphones in-ear headphones to block out sounds, um, and sort of being very aware of like my senses as well. So with ADHD we're overstimulated by a lot of things, so whether that's light, that's to do with photophobia. So it depends on the lightness of my room as well. So if it's very, very bright, I could feel very blinded. But if it's very, very dark, yeah, I could feel very, very sleepy. So that was something I started to notice. Um, there's in terms of my energy levels and my sleep, they're very, very essential as well. So starting to look at my daily sort of routine as well, like how is it fixed on my energy levels? Am I breaking my day up? Because one of the things was I used to overwork and I used to forget to eat. So there's a lot of lack of nutrition as well with people with ADHD in the modern society. And then also like, in terms of my nutrients as well. So I started to look into that. So omega 3 is very essential as well, and exercising as well. So to help calm down and sort of stimulate certain symptoms, looking at certain areas as well. So of doing all of that sort of side, and then doing also the brain work as well. So about the thinking, the coaching. I started to do a bit more of journaling as well, and sort of trying to organize my days around like planners and stuff like that. Yeah, trying to become like more routine. It sounds very robotic, but I mean it's essential that people with ADHD and other neurodiverse conditions have some sort of routine.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're certainly more aware perhaps than before in terms of how you're feeling and how you can make the day perhaps more structured so that it suits you better and you feel like you're doing well and that you're positive, you're feeding yourself, you're looking after yourself, you're also able to get everything done. So planning and being organized seems like one of the things that you've taken away, for sure. I'd like to hear a little bit more about any stigmas that you've experienced. You mentioned a few already in terms of your childhood, and you mentioned the mosque and maybe family members as well, and just how different people have reacted to you. Any others that you wanted to sort of pick up or mention before we move on?
Uh, so I mean, so certain things like hearing that you're always lazy or that you can't fit up to being this sort of perfect human being. You can't because you can't do certain tasks and stuff. So that's the sort of degrading part. But then people like there's certain things where well, especially from a religious and cultural angle. So people, if a child was hyperactive and had a hyperactive form of ADHD, they might think, oh, this guy or girl's got jinn in them, or we got some black magic or something done on us. Or you might hear that, I've heard from people saying, oh, everybody's got ADHD, like, and or ADHD is caused by sugar, or like there was always, for me it was like I was falling behind in life. Like it's a constant thing even now. Like I'm always feeling that I'm constantly falling behind like in life because of people and stuff. And then also like because obviously it impacts your career opportunities, impacts your growing up, impacts relationships, and because genetic is also genetic as well, so it passes on through genes. So like it's kind of trying to accept it, but then also trying to move on and sort of challenge the narratives, because like with mental health and stuff like that as well, it can get very very severe when it's undiagnosed as well, and it is pretty unfair, the way society responds to people with them conditions as well.
Yes. So you mentioned before about neurodiversity, and it sounds to me like it's super, super important that we speak more about this subject and so that it can really penetrate society as much as possible so that everyone is more aware that neurodiversity exists in every single community, every single age group as well. And it shouldn't be something that we are putting down to, for example, like you mentioned, laziness, or lots of other taunts that might um, be directed at somebody that might actually have a different brain and a different way of thinking and a different perspective on life. Um, so, how do you think we can start to destigmatize um, the conditions that we've mentioned: ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia?
So I mean like just showing appreciation for it, like to be honest, I've heard there's actually like in up north somewhere, I think it's like Bolton somewhere, there's actually a Send Madrasa. Like for the
Hmm.
first time I've
Hmm.
heard there's a
Hmm.
mosque being built for special needs students or children.
And just for people that haven't heard of Send, can you also explain that?
I think it's special educational needs and
Yeah.
disabilities. I think,
Yes.
yeah. So that's very interesting. And here's a funny little story. Actually, a few years ago, I actually worked in a secondary school in the SEND department with kids who were autistic and had ADHD and other
Mm-hmm.
neurodiverse conditions. Little did I
Mm-hmm.
know I was actually one of them myself, and I
Mm.
got on with them as well. So that's a very funny
Uh,
part. But
Ironic, yeah.
yeah. But
Mm.
yeah, it's very essential, like especially in madrasas as well, because like I heard of a story just literally about 1 2 weeks ago where there was this very tall boy, um, like I think he was just a teenager, and one of the mosque teachers said to him, "Look, you're so tall, but you can't read the Quran." Think like how much of an impact that would mean. Like, oh wait, this guy's tall and he's an older child, but he can't read the Quran. That what would that do? And they found out obviously that he's dyslexic in school. So it's a very very important because then you're being made to feel rubbish by most teachers, and being made to feel rubbish by your school teachers and your friends and your school and your relationships, and then that leading into the long term impact. What happens is these young children, unfortunately, they could end up on the wrong sides of society, which then could lead to prison. And there's also with like ADHD and stuff, there's also high suicide rates as well. So helping Muslims see that it's not a jokey thing. Mental health isn't a jokey thing, and so learning difficulties aren't jokey things. Um, because it can have long term consequences in so many areas, and not to only the person themselves, but the people around them, the family around them, and everything. And also showing that it's like I'm openly vocal with it about my family. I've got cousins and family members who are autistic, got Asperger's syndrome, dyslexia as well. So I'm openly being very vocal in it within my own immediate circle, and I'm pushing it out there because I've firsthand seen the impacts of it, especially being high functioning as well. So like yeah, I personally see like for me it's a personal responsibility as well, but also generally as Muslims as well, it's a responsibility for all of us because Islam isn't only meant for the neurotypical Muslim who ticks all the boxes, who has all the sort of A to B lifestyle of live well going through school, education, earning, living, having children, whatever. Like it includes people who actually struggle as well in them areas. It's not just for the so-called typical people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we often hear this quote about those that are struggling, especially when it comes to deen or reading the Quran, for example. There's so much more reward for those individuals anyway, who are struggling. So absolutely, you know, Islam not only sort of encompasses people that have a neurodiversity or are of that circle, but it's more Islam actually embraces those people completely. So I think it's again one of those many things that as a community that we can work on. And as you say, it starts with one person sharing it with their own immediate circle, and then there can be sort of a ripple effect where people are discussing this, and ultimately that if we as individuals take it upon ourselves to look at other people with a certain level of respect and give them dignity and not put them down or make flyaway comments that seem like we might be wanting the best for a child or for a friend, but actually those flyaway comments can be very very damaging to a person. So it's definitely about being more self-aware, I think, and knowing what we're saying, when we're saying it, and how we're saying it. Um, yeah, so lots of takeaways for me there, that's for sure. Um, I'd love to move on and speak to you a little bit more about some of the other self-care practices. So you've actually already spoken about this, but any sort of must-do self-care practices that you would or you do yourself or you would recommend um, for our viewers or listeners who might be experiencing some of the symptoms that you've mentioned.
So some of the things is like, for example, what we consume in terms of food. So I also know I have a weakness for eating cakes and sweet stuff. Uh, but I mean, when there's excess like artificial sugar consumption, that leads to sort of brain fog and your energy levels spiking and depleting very, very quick. So I knew that obviously after my diagnosis and prior to my diagnosis and stuff, that my diet was being really, really affected by that. Um, and then also looking at staying fit as well and exercising. So high cardiovascular activity. So I've started off skipping as well. Um, skipping, I was doing jogging and things like that. But obviously, you've got look at what sort of fits you as well. To sort of expand your energy out, because with ADHD our body's always seeking for stimulation a lot of the time. So I've started that, but I also do freestyle wrestling as well, and that's basically like it's Sunnah wrestling, and that's really helped me over sort of especially the last sort of 5 months. It's been a real confidence boost, especially being surrounded by like other Muslims and all other what's it called, other people who are learning and growing as well. So that's really been a confidence booster as well, and also like challenging me mentally. So that's very actually interesting. So there was actually, I think there's some studies done on children who have neurodiverse conditions like autism and stuff like that, ADHD as well. And what people they start to do when they notice it in youngsters, they actually send them to martial arts classes, because with like dyspraxia and ADHD and stuff, that like with dyspraxia, that I forgot to mention earlier, so that affects my motor coordination skills. So if I was writing, I could only write for more than like a few minutes and my hand starts to get painful. And that same with even me being an artist, like for years I've been writing and drawing, but it's actually causes pain when I'm actually writing, and I didn't know this my entire school period. I just thought it was me, but now I know, and I have to look at adjustments. But I mean, with martial arts and stuff like that, that's actually sort of helped me start understanding my mind and how I coordinate with my body. Because there was, when growing up with dyspraxia and stuff, I was always having bike accidents as well, um, and not being able to notice left or right. Um, Noticing from left to right or getting directions, I would really, really struggle getting with ADHD. I struggled to get to the train station, but then with timing, because there's a lot of timing issues, staying punctual and stuff like that with ADHD. But then with dyspraxia, a lot of it's the direction issues. So imagine moving to London and trying to use the train lines and train stations and stuff like it's very, very confusing. It makes things very, very difficult with people with neurodiversity. But yeah, down to the normal level, it affects your coordination skills. So martial arts and stuff like that sort of sport, it helps with coordination, because I then realized also throughout growing up I've also struggled with team sports, and that's very common with people with ADHD and dyspraxia as well. Trying to keep up with everybody, especially when there's certain fast-paced things going on. But the martial arts, because it's very, very individual focused, like the coaches as well, like I've had to explain a few things like with my about my condition and stuff, and then they chunkify tasks up into small parts and stuff like that. So it's very, very helpful as well. And then that, like the way I learned there, I try to see it as a holistic thing. So I'm not just putting these adjustments in for work, or I'm not just learning how to do things at wrestling. That's actually also helping me train my mind in other areas of my life. So trying to trying to bring them all together. Um, and then that also one I heard about one hadith where it says that a strong believer is better than a weak believer as well. So applying that to sort of physical strength as well, and it's sort of strengthening the mind and strengthening your confidence and building on all of that sort of stuff. So that's been helpful in terms of that. And also breaking up your day as well, because obviously working from home as well, and um, growing up, well, obviously we're in a sedate lifestyle, and for thousands of years we've always been out and about walking around, and we were never made to sit on office desks. So even generally, people with or without ADHD and these conditions can benefit from these as well. So I, even when it was a rainy day in winter, I used to just take my coat out and walk around the block, because then again your mind is just stuck between the four walls, and you're not giving your mind a break. And mindful walking and nature. So there's green is also known as a color of peace, and bringing tranquility to the mind. And so that I started to implement last year. Taking walks in nature as well, and even like taking my headphones out and just literally embracing the sounds. And then it's very essential, because I even heard about like this one disorder. It's called nature deficit disorder quite a few years ago, and that's actually because of our modern cities and stuff. They're built of grey. It's a lot of grey everywhere. There's not anything of natural for us. So they're saying a lot of children nowadays, they're growing up without nature, and that's really really impacting them, whereas they're stuck inside on the phones and technology, and it's very impacting their sort of behavior and their mind, their thinking. And that's um that's also linked to actually people saying there's actually ADHDs everywhere. But this, because you've got to imagine, yeah, like our brain as a pinboard. Now, throughout for thousands of years, we've only been able to use like 50 pins and put 50 pins on that board. But nowadays, because we're overstimulated with technology, we're seeing over, like, I think a few years ago it was like 8,000 logos a day or something, advertisements. And now, because of rapid dopamine firing, it's actually producing ADHD like symptoms amongst a lot of people. So getting these essential breaks and getting out and using your hands to do other things like building and like doing, like, like Jenga and stuff like that, little activities. So doing them on occasion, they're really helpful. But then also with the vitamins as well. So with omega 3, I've only been taking that for probably, I think, since last Ramadan actually. And that's essential because obviously within our diets, they say like 60-70% of our brain is made out of like fatty acids. And obviously, if you're coming from a, say, South Asian background, a lot of them fatty acids are replaced with sunflower oil and stuff like that, with fried food and stuff like that. But I mean, the um, omega three is that's what actually helps your sort of cognition and stuff, and that's very very essential. And that only stays in your body for a short amount of time, hence why it's emphasized to take that a lot more. And our bodies are over in abundance of omega 6 as well. So that's the stuff that we need less of. But generally, looking for omega 3 um, fish oil, you could get like gelatin free tablets and stuff like that as well out there. So that's been really helpful. And there's this ancient. Well, this isn't like well, modern day pharmaceutical pushed, but basically there was ancient Chinese medicines, and they're known as like medical mushrooms, and that's like there's six of them. They're known as the super six. So there's chaga, cordyceps, lion's mane, maitake, reishi, and shiitake. And they're also known for like their mental cognition, your physical strength, your energy levels, and things like that. So I kind of have like that's what I kind of look at it as, in terms of my health, my religion, my physical fitness as well, and also my relationships as well. Because with ADHD and these sort of conditions, we struggle with relationships and friendships as well. Because I never really had any proper one friendship group. I was always sort of isolated or feeling lonely in my own world, like being nerding out on different things when growing up. But trying to sort of make time for family and friend time and make time to switch off, because like I've been days and weeks where I've been working and I've actually forgotten where of the last time I've met my friends or family members, but it's not mentally been my fault. So trying to think of everything holistically, that's a good way of approaching it.
Amazing advice. It was almost like so fully comprehensive, Faisal. Thank you. In terms of covering, food, exercise, vitamins, getting out and about, maintaining your relationships, and really taking, onus, and taking responsibility for all of those different things to make yourself feel well and happy. I think sometimes when we think about all of that, it can be overwhelming and difficult. But as you said, you can sort of target one thing at a time, and hopefully get to a place where you feel really, really good, and you're able to make time for the important things in your life. um, so I know that you started a Instagram page called ADHD Visualized, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I guess, what prompted that, and what what came of it.
So, to be honest, so with the ADHD visualize stuff, so because I'm a creative person, I'm an artist, so I like to create things which can be very visual but also easily digestible. So, and then I've had the background, like I've done drama GCSE, and I've always been an artist, and I've done marketing and stuff like that. So I wanted to incorporate things in a way which are easily digestible. um, and yeah, so I've kind of put together like that head, well, the username. But then also my motivation behind it, like my essential motivation is I don't want anybody else to go through what I've been through in my life. And obviously there's been a lot of goods, but the pain behind it all, I don't want people to go through that, essentially, from whether they're young to when they're older. So that's the essential sort of like my intention behind it. But then like I had an idea, I think it was in November, where I made a video on ADHD and being Muslim, and that went super viral on TikTok. Like I literally showed how through acting how prayer gets impacted, or how it is like when I'm reading Quran and stuff like that. So showing that, because in Muslim community it's not talked about, and in the last study that was done on black and ethnic minorities with ADHD was done in 2014 in East London. So it's been quite a few years, and then basically like ethnic minorities were less diagnosed as well compared to our white counterparts as well. So really sort of pushing that pushing that motivation, especially as a Muslim and an ethnic minority and a young person growing up. uh that's been my target and my approach. But one thing I also remembered is that, for example, if a person, so two ways, especially when I'm reading Quran, like it's one thing I heard when growing up was that if you can't concentrate and stuff, and like this kind of fits in with my ADHD, because we're distracted by patterns on the prayer mats and all that sort of stuff as well, and everything around us. So just to close my eyes whilst I'm praying and try to visualize myself like just praying to God, like, and not like on a platform and not seeing that there's anything around me. So trying to mentally disassociate from the world. So, and then also in terms of reading Quran or reading books, I saw this one video of I think it was a mosque teacher, and there was this child in Pakistan somewhere that was very had ADHD, and she couldn't sit still in the mosque class. And what he actually done was he got the child's finger and actually went down the lines of the Quran, like what was reading it, and the child was able to focus. And I was like, wait, so this is what it is all these years? Like, I've not been able to do that. So just trying to show, like, obviously, that the things that have helped me out, things that I've learned, and like obviously raising awareness about the doom and gloom side of it as well, to show that it's not just a superpower as people think about it, or it's a fashionable thing to have. Because nowadays, because of obviously the whole TikTok culture and everything going on online, anybody, like, oh, somebody's feeling sad today, and somebody said, oh no, I'm feeling depressed. You don't know the difference between being sad and being depressed. So for me, it's really sort of clarifying and putting that voice out there about the sort of the truth about it, really.
No, thank you so much for sharing. And and giving us those tips in particular as well. Just putting your finger as you're reading along, whatever it might be, can be super helpful. And all of the advice that you've shared with us, thank you again. I guess you've also mentioned already that, in terms of the video that you produced, there was incorporation of, Islam into that, but also I know as an artist and the artwork that you produce can be inspired by, Islam as well. So what kind of led you into that, and putting Islam into your artwork? What influenced you to do that?
So Islam and artwork, like traditionally, with Islam, people associate it just with like calligraphy or like Quranic calligraphy, and that's it. But obviously, as Islam, I feel it's very, very holistic, and with art, it's been therapy for me as a child, and then with nature, obviously, we believe it's created as a sign of God. So one thing, I'll essentially, when I started as an artist, I was known to paint landscapes and like sceneries. So I really, really love that, and so that reminded me of the signs of God. And every time growing up, I used to love spending time in nature. So that's incorporating that, and the mental health aspect of it as well. Like it's really, really helped me in a lot of tough times in my life. Like just drawing, feeling, getting myself out there on paper or canvas. So that's really, really been helpful for me.
Amazing. um I In staying with your artwork and the art that you produce, what are you hoping that people will take away when they look at your work?
Um, so like to not feel like there's any sort of boundary. You don't have to be a professional artist with the old studio just to do art. Like it's literally, you could doodle on a paper, or you could start off with whatever you have at home. There's nothing fancy about it. It's therapy in it as well. And if you want to become specialized, you can. And there's so many different medias and mediums you could actually use. Like that's essentially what I've done. I've bounced around with so many, but only by trying. It's what you learn, what you're good at, and what would be beneficial to you. And I feel it's very they say a picture paints 1,000 words, or something along the lines of that. But so that's essential how it is. Like you could paint or draw one thing, and people how people perceive it is another. So you don't really need to be critical about it. It's not like, obviously I didn't even go through the traditional route of being an artist as well, because I got a D in my A level, and then I didn't even do it at uni. So it's like using that as a therapy. You can, it's very similar to, like, for example, for me, when I do salah, like praying and stuff, you disassociate from the world. And with that's the same with canvas and paints as well. Or how, even if you're drawing or doodling, like you could just you could just, I personally feel like spilling from my brain straight down my hand into the ink and onto the paper. So I try to visualize the process of it, like doing as well. So that constant flow, like you're constantly in the flow of life, really. So that's what I kind of see it as.
No, amazing. I think um you mentioned that there's a feeling that you want to invoke in people, or a message that you want to give people as they look at your work. So it's great to hear that you hope that they feel that there are no boundaries, and they can be free and be an artist too, and it doesn't necessarily um, have to be a particular background or career path that you've taken, but you can use art in so many ways as therapy. Um, I guess we've also already touched upon this, but I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on stigma towards neurodiversity in the Muslim community in particular. I mean, did the response to the video that you created, for example, did it give you a different perspective? What do you think about that?
Yeah, because like this is one thing as well. So when I created it, I was always like, even until after the video actually. So I was very, very doubting myself, even with that account. Like, am I actually doing this? Is it really worth it? Like, is there any purpose behind it? And as it blew up, I had so many people like commenting, like, "Oh, I might have this symptom. Oh, my child's like this in school or in mosque," and I had so many comments. And then even in my smaller circle, like in a circle, I've had people contacting me, people who actually think that they may have it as well. um so it's very, very interesting, because then it reaffirmed in me that there's actual need for it. There's a need for it, because where everybody's hiding beneath the surface. So me creating this platform, or my these accounts and this video, it was actually to cause a reaction, like in terms of that, to shake up the world a bit, like to show that, oh wait, there's something that's been very, very hidden, but it's very, very important. And essentially, if you look back, there was actually a study done a Kenyan tribe, and they've actually pinpointed down there's actually a gene, a ADHD gene, that's within the human body. So you had this tribe in Kenya who had this ADHD gene, but then you had their sort of cousins, the same in America, and then they compared them, and then they looked at the nutrition levels of them. And those who were in Kenya, they were actually just tribal hunter gatherers, going to find their protein in the food, and they were always keeping themselves full and energized and stuff. Whereas their counterparts in America, they were under sort of like um they were underfed, or like they didn't do well in school, or they were in prison, or they weren't doing well. So it kind of shows you that there is an actual deeper societal level impact of it beyond our minds. And yeah, like that's that really.
Absolutely. And it just harks back to the point that raising awareness is so important. Um, about a whole host of conditions that you've mentioned, and neurodiversity within society as a whole. Um, I guess we're slowly coming to a close. I wanted to ask you about advice. So, if we have people who are listening or watching us now who may be struggling with a diagnosis that they've had, or perhaps thinking about the conditions and the symptoms that you've mentioned, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's been given a diagnosis and they're struggling with it, or to someone that feels that they may have a condition that we've mentioned?
So with the diagnosis, there can be some problems sometimes, like if you go to a psychiatrist and you don't tick a certain amount of boxes, and you still feel that you have it, but they haven't like thought, or through their sort of conclusion, they don't think that you have it. Then I would also recommend you go through another psychiatrist. You continue to sort of look into it, because it could be sort of ADHD, or it could be dyslexia or dyspraxia, or you may need to just get it firmed up, because like what I done was, when I wrote them 2-3 pages of just continuous symptoms from childhood into adulthood, getting that essential information out and how it's sort of impacting your life, that's very, very essential. um and seeing how it manifests, whether in this workplace or in your home environment, your relationships. So that's the essential part of it. But then also, if you do, let's say if your child is in school, so then also if you think your child has it, then also go to your SEN department, so the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Department. So schools always should always have a learning support department. So continue to be on their case. And because like some of these schools or some organizations, they could take long to get back to you. But then also, if you're in a workplace, so where you in workplaces also could have you could have learning support departments, where you can have a occupational therapist and stuff, so you could reach out to them. But then as an adult, you should also reach out to your GP as well. That's an essential part. And on to top that off, you can get extra support. So once you've got that firm through sort of your GP and your occupational therapist and your learning support at work, there's also access to work, which you could get support from. So that's like through, it's like a government initiative. So like that would help you. Like for example, with my ADHD, they've given me even more bigger headphones which block out more sound for me. And there's certain reasonable adjustments that you could get, like coaching, life coaching, like catered with your sort of your diagnosis as well. So that's sort of ongoing as well, and your workplace can get reimbursed by the government with that as well. Um, so I think that's that maybe.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much. It really, I'm sure will be so helpful to people listening, or to friends and family of people that might have a particular condition that we've mentioned. I guess lastly, just before we go, I did want to ask you one last question about what's been the one top most helpful thing in your journey to, in terms of your sort of diagnosis and afterwards, what's been the most what's helped you the most in your journey to keep you going?
I think one of the things was I even actually one of the things I also done was joined a support group as well, like men's ADHD support group on Facebook, and that was actually the first time when I sort of started to figure out like, do I have this or do I don't. I joined it on Facebook like 8 9 months before my diagnosis, and that was the first time I actually felt that I'm not alone in this world anymore. Like it's just not me feeling like this. There's so many other hundreds of us feeling like this. So that's been really really helpful for me, and also one thing is like brain dumping. That's another thing. So like that's literally it's like a journal. You get a journal and like I literally date myself to go to a coffee shop or something like that, and literally just what all the overwhelming things and everything that's just going on in my mind, I just write it all out. So bullet journaling is a way of actually making it a bit more sort of concise. So that's been really like they're two essential things, and sort of taking time out to even sort of like appreciate yourself, because like things like boundaries, like they're important. And noticing, becoming more aware about yourself, starting to learn about yourself is very essential. So which direction do you want to go in life? Like me, I had to take ownership of it in the end of the day. Like I don't want to continue my life being this sort of undiagnosed person. For me, it's like I need to get myself to a place which is better for myself in the future. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah.
It does. It absolutely does. Thank you so much for being so candid and honest and open about everything that you've shared. I certainly have learned so much, and yeah, just thank you again for all the knowledge that you've shared with us, all of your wisdom, and I hope that you go from strength to strength when it comes to your diagnosis and your life and everything that you are juggling. Um, so thank you again. Jazakallah khair.
Inshallah.
Take care. Bye bye.
Yes. Thank you, Sivan. Jazakallah here. Here, take it. Sound.
Well, thank you again so much for joining me on this episode of the Mindful Muslim podcast. I hope you found it enlightening and learnt as much as I did from Faisal, with all of his wisdom that he shared with us. Inshallah, you took a lot from it. Jazakallah khair, and I will see you on the next episode.